Well, I was born on 5th of May, 1920. You do the math. In London, England. At home in northwest London, a suburb of London called Golders Green in the then Borough District Council of Hendon. My parents were upwardly mobile, a term that didn't exist then, that we use today. My father had been born a true Cockney within the East End of London, within the sound of Bow Bells. He was of Sephardic Jewish background, and my grandfather, whom I never met because he came to America before I was born, was from Amsterdam in the Netherlands. My mother, who was 15 or so years younger than my father, was an emigre from a shtetl in what today is called Belarus, White Russia. She was part of a 6 brothers and sisters, mother and father, who left. The shtetl was in Grodno in Belarus, and they didn't have a visa for my mother, but they all took a boat, I'm not quite sure from where, to London, where 17, 18 years later, my mother met my father, and they were married.
Okay.
In the East End of London, which was then traditionally a Jewish area, very much. Not today, it's changed a lot. But my mother, I won't get into a lot of details, but she was a milliner, and she was orphaned at the age of 11. Both her parents died from, in those days was called consumption, TB, more or less one after the other. And they had no funds for my mother to continue her schooling, and she went to work at age 11. And the one thing that women in particular learned to do in the shtetl was what in Yiddish word called schneidering, tailor. And she and her sisters were outworkers making hats for prostitutes in the West End of London, the theatre district. And my mother persuaded her older sisters to go into business on their own, and they managed to borrow, which in the £100, which in those days was a lot of money, to set up their own business. So my mother's business flourished quite well, making her and my father to move to this more affluent, up-and-coming suburb, which had just been reached by the Underground, London's tube train. And I think Golders Green in 1920 was the last stop on the Northern Line, as it's called.
How about that?
In any event, I won't go into a lot of detail unless you want me to, but my mother went to work the next day after I was born.
Sure.
And I was put in charge by a nanny, whom I saw a lot more than my mother, who was a English country girl from Bedfordshire, which is not far from London, and happened to be, well, not happened to be, she was working class and supported the Labour Party, left wing. In 1926, I was politicized by her and the BBC, that we listened to on earphones on what was called a crystal set, wireless, as that we called them in England, to the BBC. Miners called it, in effect, a general strike. And my Nan, as she was called, was and the BBC were sympathetic, as I was, to the striking miners. My father, who was a conservative, became what, again, didn't exist, I don't think, the term in England. He became a scab working as a bus conductor for London Transport Bus System, because the transport workers went on strike in sympathy. It was a general strike. 1 year later, I got sent very unwillingly by my parents to boarding school, shipped off without much warning or preparation, very unhappy, kind of Dickensian, very cold, Victorian, classic sort of English. Boarding prep school, then 1936, 1932, age 12, I passed what was called, the entrance exams to a British public school, which of course typically meant private school, called Mill Hill, which is a moderately well-known British public school. So I got into the whole British educational class system. I did quite well academically. 1 year, I've forgotten now, 1935 perhaps, I won the Latin, French, English and Geography prizes for the fifth form. And so I was ready to go to university, but I was too young to go to university in England. And I wasn't getting on too well with my father in particular politically.